I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 138 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics.
Point 1.1 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024. The committee is considering the certificates of nomination for both Caroline Maynard, who is to the position of Information Commissioner, referred to the committee on Monday, October 21st, and we are also considering the certificate of nomination to the position of Commissioner of Lobbying for referred to the committee also on Monday, October 21st, 2024. Just for the benefit of the committee, what I've decided to do, given the fact that we are well over an hour into this, I have put Ms. Maynard and Ms. Belanger together on a panel. Originally it was supposed to be separate, but respecting everybody's time. Now I will let the committee know that we do have up to 2 hours. But I'm going to leave it at the discretion of the committee to tell me when they're finished with their lines of questioning. The other thing that I'd like to do, and we've done this before, is to give Mr. Villemure and Mr. Green an opportunity to reset the time at the hour after the questions. So if the committee is okay with that, I'd like to propose that as well. Are we good? Okay. So we're going to start. We're going to start with you, Ms. Maynard. If you don't mind, you have up to 5 minutes to address the committee, followed by Madame Belanger. Go ahead, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm pleased to appear before you today in the context of my proposed reappointment as Information Commissioner of Canada. Nearly 7 years ago, I arrived before this committee with a deep desire to serve Canadians, a relentless focus on results, and a vision on how I intended to fulfill my role as agent of Parliament. I had 4 specific priorities: ensuring that the work at my office was open and transparent, improving collaboration with stakeholders to address barriers in the system, tackling the existing backlog of complaints, and preparing to implement legislative amendments to the Access to Information Act. Je suis fière de ce que j'ai accompli dans chacun de ces domaines.
I am proud of my track record in each of these areas. My accomplishments are documented in the annual reports I have tabled and in the background materials I have provided to you. Under my leadership, the Office of the Information Commissioner is an employer of choice. The members of my team may operate in a challenging environment, but they truly love the work they do, and they believe in the right of access. Our very high rate of retention and impressive employee survey results are the proof.
Overall of the Access to Information system, which has not been meeting its legislative purpose. Through my systemic investigations, I have put the spotlight on the root causes of issues. I have also met frequently with ministers, senior department officials, management teams, and employees. The goal of such meetings is always to promote culture change, to encourage better performance, and to facilitate compliance. In terms of enforcement, whenever I have been able to resolve complaints without resorting to issuing orders, I have done so. But I have also not hesitated to spur institutions to action through my orders and, when necessary, to litigations in the courts. J'ai également pris très au sérieux mon rôle.
I have also taken my role of providing advice to parliamentarians very seriously. I understand that we live in a time of societal and technological change. We are faced with obsolete systems, inadequate information management, and declining levels of trust in public institutions. I have worked hard to be a dependable source of information and expertise in the field of access to information. I have done my utmost to provide a clear picture of the operations of my office and a frank assessment of the state of the system. I have based my testimony on my observations and the investigations my team
represents stability for the office, the ATIP community, and Canadians, allowing me to continue to build on what I have accomplished so far. If I am given the honor to continue in this role, I will carry out my duties with the same determination and focus on results I have shown throughout my mandate. I will be relentless in speaking out on the importance of transparency by default and the role of every public servant that they must play in ensuring that the rights of Canadians are respected. I have also seen how stakeholders advocate for a better system, but I've also seen how hard public servants in the ETHI trenches are trying to make this system work in the meantime. These people have my support, and they need and deserve the support of their leaders in bringing about the necessary transformation. The policy and legislative changes I have recommended are based on experience and have been endorsed by stakeholders. As the next review of the Act looms on the horizon, I will continue to press for long overdue improvements. They would contribute to making Canada the global leader in transparency that it should always have been. Enfin, mes expériences en tant que commissaire.
In closing, my experiences as Commissioner have only deepened my profound commitment to the right to access of information. I know that I have been effective in upholding and advancing this right, and that's why I remain positive and hopeful for the future and why I am prepared to continue to serve in this role. Thank you. I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you, Ms. Maynard, for your opening remarks. We will now move to Ms. Bélanger, who has 5 minutes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I am pleased to be here today and honored to be considered for a second term as Commissioner of Lobbying. When I first appeared before this committee in 2017, I recognized the importance of the federal lobbying regime in contributing to public confidence in federal institutions and officials. After 7 years as Commissioner, I continue to believe in the significance of this work to support and enhance transparent and ethical lobbying.
Je suis très fière du travail.
I'm very proud of the work that my team and I have accomplished. I would like to highlight some of these achievements. We continuously made improvements to the registry of lobbyists with respect to filing processes, functionality, and search features. We also enhanced transparency by aligning the subject matters to the relevant details of the lobbying. Monthly returns about lobbying and designated public office holders now need to identify the details and not only the subject. We expanded our education activities and reached a diverse audience. We've reached over 9,000 stakeholders through more than 500 presentations. We expanded our connections with media, academia, other government organizations, and the international community while increasing our proactive engagement with stakeholders. Our website was renewed to improve the availability of helpful information. I opened numerous investigations to ensure compliance with federal lobbying requirements. This resulted in 16 referrals of suspected offenses to the RCMP and in 6 investigation reports to Parliament. I also submitted preliminary recommendations to this committee to be considered in improving the Lobbying Act. And last, I issued a new version of the Lobbyist Code of Conduct setting clear ethical standards that are expected of lobbyists.
It's the backdrop of a move, 2 elections, and a pandemic. In addition to the ongoing and increasing corporate reporting obligations, the work was performed by a very small team of about 30 employees. In both 2021 and 2023, we succeeded in obtaining additional budget to increase our staff capacity. We now have resourcing for approximately 37 employees compared to 28 when I started in my mandate. Our current total annual budget is approximately $6.2 million. Roughly 4.7 goes to salaries and benefits, leaving an operating budget of 1.5. Speaking of budget, I would urge parliamentarians to consider a new funding model that preserves the independence of agents of Parliament. While we have accomplished a lot, there are plans in place to move forward. I've recently issued interpretation bulletins about the application of the Act. And should I be reappointed, I expect to issue more, including about the threshold that triggers registration for lobbying done by employees on behalf of their employer. We will expand education and understanding by creating and sharing clear and accessible content about lobbying, including videos and learning modules for various audiences. We'll continue to improve the registry at every opportunity so that users can easily and effectively find the information that is available. Finally, I'll continue to prepare in anticipation of a long overdue legislative review of the Lobbying Act. The last review occurred in 2012 and brought no changes. I must press upon again that it is important that Parliament make legislative changes so that our federal lobbying regime can be the best of its kind and remain effective. This is crucial because rigorous transparency standards contribute to a healthy democracy. If I am reappointed to a second term, I will continue to serve Parliament and Canadians in keeping with the mandate set by the Lobbying Act and in accordance with the highest integrity, public sector values, and ethical standards. I would like to conclude by expressing a heartfelt thank you to each employee of the office. They are actively engaged and contribute to an exceptional work environment. I'm extremely grateful for their dedication, professionalism, and excellence in delivering on our mandate. It has truly been an honor and privilege to lead them during the last 7 years, and I appreciate the support that they've provided me. Mr. Chair and committee members, I also want to extend my deepest appreciation to each of you for the respectful and constructive interactions we have had over the course of my time as Commissioner. I welcome this opportunity to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madame Belanger. Just a reminder to committee members, we do have up to 2 hours. I'm going to leave it at your good graces. When you want to end this session, if you want to end it early, let me know. If you want to continue for up to the full 2 hours, let me know as well. We'll accommodate as best we can. The other thing I would ask, too, is that you direct your question to each individual distinctly and let them know who the question is being directed to. Okay? So we're going to start with Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Commissioner Belanger, why is registering to lobby important?
For transparency, for making sure that Canadians know who's meeting whom about what and what leads to the decision that decision makers are making.
And why are your powers under the Act to investigate important?
To ensure compliance, to ensure that there is transparency, to make sure that the requirements of the Act as set out currently are met.
And what do you think about the shared obligations of parliamentarians and officers of Parliament to ensure Canadians' trust in our democratic institutions?
I believe we do have a very important role to play. In fact, I think agents of Parliament are almost guardians of values. Former Official Languages Commissioner had said that at one point, and I have always believed in that.
I want to talk about, so I've written you some correspondence of late, October 24th, and before that on October the 3rd, both dealing with Mark Carney, an advisor to the Prime Minister, and I want to lay out a bit of why that correspondence was necessary, and then I have a couple questions for you. So first of all, we have, in no particular order, we have the heat pump hustle by Mark Carney, also known as Carbon Tax Carney, where we learned he was using his role as a special advisor to the government in the UK to lobby for his own interests. So we've seen that this is a behavior that he's comfortable undertaking. Now, he, within days of being appointed to this panel of experts to advise the Prime Minister. Now, we know that he is, it's a panel of one. He's the only one there. He landed billions in loans for his self-described friend who heads Telesat. And this was announced as a way to connect Canadians, but we've learned recently that there are no requirements for a certain number of Canadians to be connected for those billions. We know that he sits on the board at Stripe, and so the government was convinced to have credit card companies cap their fees, but Stripe, where he stands to benefit from his interests, isn't passing those savings on. So they're benefiting from that as well. And we know that his investment firm holds the second largest mortgage insurer in the country, which will directly benefit from the announcement that again came days after his appointment to these changes will allow for longer amortization periods, meaning that Canadians will pay more interest for longer, benefiting his interests again. So I've written you a couple of letters, but Section 10.4. Could you just articulate what Section 10.4 of the Act allows you to do?
It allows me to investigate if I have reason to believe that the investigation is necessary to ensure compliance.
Okay. And you articulated that to me in our most recent correspondence and in past correspondence as well. You also have an obligation to pass things on to the RCMP. What would trigger that requirement?
When I start an investigation, the moment I have reason to believe that an offense has occurred, I immediately suspend my investigation and I forward to the RCMP. And I've done that more than 16 times in the last 7 years.
Do you have any investigations that you have? Have you handed any files to the RCMP that they are currently reviewing?
They have 4 suspended files of mine currently.
So that is to say that you suspended 4 files pending the decision of the RCMP.
I've suspended 16 over the years.
But you have 4
currently
current.
there are 4 that there is continuously to be suspended.
I
yes?
appreciate that precision. Thank you. Are you able to, I want to circle back to that piece about Canadians' confidence in your role. Are you able to tell Canadians today, I referred to Mr. Mark Carney as carbon tax Carney, but he's quickly earning the moniker of conflict of interest Carney. Are you able to tell Canadians if you're currently investigating Mark Carney for potential violations under the Lobbying Act?
I won't confirm whether I'm investigating, and the reason why I don't do that is I do not want to jeopardize any future possible criminal investigation. What I will tell you, as I've said to you in the letter, is that I look at everything. I've opened more than 170 files in the last 7 years. I look at everything. So I can tell you that I am reviewing the matter.
I appreciate you advising us that you're reviewing the matter. Now, if you want to refer something to the RCMP, does the Minister of Justice, is he required to have any intervention or involvement?
You would have to ask the RCMP that. Once I've sent to the RCMP and they do their work, I assume they discuss with the Public Prosecution's Office. I don't believe that.
And if you find that someone has violated the Act, are you required to refer that to a cabinet minister?
Absolutely not, and I would not.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. We're going to go now to the member from Chateauguay-Lacole. Ms. Shanahan, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair, and I thank the witnesses for being before us today. This is not the first time that I've had the opportunity to question you both in over the years in different circumstances, and I'm very pleased to be doing so today. So I'm going to turn first to Madame Bélanger as a lobbying commissioner. First of all, thank you for very clearly stating your role and your approach and how you work. Cute little derogatory names that are attributed to the different people that you may be looking at, does that affect your work at all?
I'm a lawyer by trade. I have been a neutral public servant my whole life. I look at the facts. I look at every single letter that's brought to my attention. I look at every newspaper article, and I open files. I look at everything. And so the names don't impact. I look at facts, and I look into facts, and that's the facts that determine the next steps in any of my files that I review.
And just because you do have a public-facing role, do you think the public is affected when these cutesy names are attached to people prior to any investigation that you may be undertaking?
I really don't think I have a view of what the public thinks. not going to go there.
Well, I thank you for your integrity in the way that you conduct yourself, and I think it is worthy of the values of Parliament and the role that you undertake. So I'd like to ask you now for an update on your investigation into Jenny Byrne. I believe that came up the last time that you appeared at this committee. Jenny Byrne and forecheck strategies, as was widely reported in the spring, and of course this was after Pierre Poilievre's election as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. The lobbying firm run by Pierre Poilievre's top strategist, Jenny Byrne, established a second company, Forecheck Strategies. I believe this was reported in the Globe and Mail, you must be aware, housed out of the same office for the purposes of lobbying federally. Now, in your last visit, you confirmed that you had indeed initiated a review. So is there an ongoing investigation?
There is an ongoing review.
An ongoing review. Thank you for that. And so have you completed your initial review? Can you talk to us about what steps that would normally take?
So when I do a preliminary review, we usually will approach a few witnesses, and then from there I decide if I have enough information to proceed to an investigation to ensure compliance.
Okay.
If it's a matter under the Act, because there should have been a registration and there is none, usually I will not talk to the person who is possibly the person who should have registered in the event that this goes to the RCMP. So it's very much an administrative review that I then will suspend and send to the RCMP if I have reason to believe that registration should have occurred.
Okay, so two things there. Who would be the witnesses that typically, that you would, in this case, that you have questioned?
Well, I will say usually it'll be public servants, all of you, senators, public office holders, those who met with those individuals who potentially require registration.
All right, so that review is undergoing. And then the second thing having to do with, have you had to suspend the review for any reason? Do you see that you will be suspending for the reasons that Mr. Barrett evoked when he questioned you earlier?
I will not comment on whether or not I've suspended or if I'm in an investigation, so simply to ensure that if this would ever to lead to an RCMP investigation, that I don't jeopardize that. And this conversation needs to happen, again, in a review of the Act, because as much as it is frustrating for all of you to not know where my investigations lead, it's frustrating for me not to be able to talk about them. So there needs to be a middle ground, and there needs to be conversation about what the processes should be, because right now, it's all or RCMP. There's nothing in the middle. There needs to be monetary penalties. There needs to be a way for me to publish that I'm of the view that there has been some breaches that don't necessarily amount to a criminal offense. That conversation needs to happen during review of the Act. That, again, is long overdue.
And so there is a possibility that you may have to, in this case, suspend and send to the RCMP. You're not at that stage yet.
But there's always a possibility in every single case that I look at.
All right, very good. I still have time, Chair. Yeah, very. All right, so a quick one for Madame Ménard. Is the current model, your financing model, est-ce que c'est adéquat pour vos besoins actuellement?
Does it currently meet your needs? Is it allowing you to carry out your mandate? The current funding model is not independent, and so I need to make requests as any other government department. Is it enough currently? No. I need additional resources. Is your role limited by the current model? We are limited in that I don't have the resources, we don't have the resources to do the work we need to do. Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. Mr. Villemur, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to you both for being with us. We always have interesting conversations because you maintain trust towards the government. I'll ask a question to you, Ms. Maynard. Does the Government of Canada have a culture of transparency, or is it quite the opposite? We have an increased number of ATIP requests and complaints every year. And that's because institutions are not giving access to information quickly, or information will be redacted. And so people turn to us to ensure that the legislation is being respected. There are exclusions and exemptions that are being used, that are being overused, instead of having proactive or voluntary disclosure. Would you say that redaction is a little overdone sometimes? Yes. We see access to information requests, and there are entire pages that are blacked out. Without getting you into any trouble, we could say that you see a lot of things that are a bit obscure. Yes. And the legislation allows for it, but there are situations where discretion could be used to give more information, but often that discretion is not being used to benefit Canadians. Information is power, as you know. And the power that Canadians have depends on what the Commission can do, or the office can do. You talked about the need for your office to be independent. What does the government respond to you when you bring that up? This is where I can actually raise this matter of independence. It should also be raised when it comes time to modernize the legislation, and in the committee's report, you accepted making such a recommendation. Whether it be Nancy or I or any other agent of Parliament, our mandate is to carry out independent investigations, and we should not have to ask for additional funding when we need it from departments that are being investigated. Such a situation could lead to distrust. Yes, it might lead people to believe that we are influenced by these mechanisms. And so, for people who are looking at your offices, impartiality is not certain to them. Well, they could wonder, because I could have to carry out investigations against departments or ministers that are responsible for approving my budget requests. If you could get independence, would that increase the credibility and trust in your office and in the government? Certainly. We are agents of Parliament. We should be accountable to Parliament. That way, you all would be responsible for asking questions on our budget, on our spending, why we are requesting additional funding. If we have too much, you could look at that as well. In the Winnipeg Lab case, there was a document that was heavily redacted. And after the work of a committee that I participated in, a lot of it was unredacted. And it seemed to have an over-classification in this case. The UG Commission, for example, I look at documents produced by government institutions, and I can see that again. Do you have any information to give us? A right to information is a right of Canadians and parliamentarians. This is how we understand how decisions are made, how funds are spent. I give comments to institutions. If titles, pages, subsections are redacted, it doesn't seem like the information should be shared. And if through an investigation we see that an exemption was not properly used and that the legislation has not been followed, well, if Canadians see these documents that are completely redacted, they ask questions and they send complaints to my office. And it stops them from understanding as well. There are certain things that could be summarized instead of entirely redacting a document. There are exclusions that are well done. And our investigations at the office are confidential. Often we have to redact because of our confidential investigations. But if we can give information, when I meet with institutions and departments, I tell them to give as much information as they can so that they better understand decisions that were made and they can trust that the information that was given to them is reliable and they would be able to better understand, like I said, decisions made and policies adopted by the department. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Villemure. We're now moving to Mr. Green. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bélanger, you are heading into your second term. What would you do differently, kind of knowing what you know now? How would you treat your second term a little bit differently?
Well, it's not official yet that I will be starting a second term, but should I have that honor? What I would do differently is not much, actually. I'm very much results-oriented. I believe in what I'm doing, and maybe I would learn personally to accept that I can't get everything done that I want done because I've only got 30 employees. But I wouldn't do much differently. What's that?
Let's talk about that because we've danced around this issue. I know for the 5 years I've seen, I've seen you in front of public accounts and in front of OGO and now here at Ethics in some capacities talking about the funding model. What would be the ideal annual budget for the office that would restore the adequate depth of capacity, like for good?
So I don't want to advance the number because I haven't actually done that study, but I would think if I want to at least, I wouldn't say double, but close. Close.
And how would your office's services be improved if the budget were larger?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. How would your office's services be improved should your budget be not double, but let's just say larger? Yes, and large. I think the services would be, we meet our service standards now when we discuss with lobbyists, but certainly there'd be more outreach, there'd be more documents, advisory opinions, more information on our registry. That would be a big push. Right now I have 47 compliance files. I would hope that would, there wouldn't be much of a backlog. So I think everything would be more efficient and faster, more relevant, stay more relevant.
Sorry, we spoke about the funding model, and I'm giving you the opportunity now to give specificity about what arm's length predictable funding would look like that was non-politicized. If you can just comment on that.
The funding model would be where we do not have to go through departments, the government that we are regulating to ask for money to be able to do our work effectively and efficiently. Ideally, we'd come to a committee, a neutral committee, who would listen to us, whom we account to, like this committee, explain the work that we do and the funding that we need, the resources that we need. And work fluctuates. There are years where I've opened 40 files and there's another year that I've done 24. So maybe there would be a way to give back the money that I don't need to my colleague, and she can give me some when she doesn't need it. So, but something needs to happen because it shouldn't go through the government of the day.
Last question for you. We're certainly seized with the studies around foreign interference. Foreign influence can also take place in terms of lobbying, be it registered or unregistered. Has your office ever been briefed on the possible threats of foreign interference using lobbyists or like agents?
No, I have not been briefed on the threats. I have been briefed on the on the legislation and the registry.
Is it something that you consider?
It would be something I consider, but I don't know if at any point that I have I certainly have top security, but I don't know if it's something that all the agencies would be willing to share with me.
Well, I'll go one step further, given that you are on the front lines and given that corporations are often owned by, foreign actors, including sometimes state governments that are actively trying to both advocate for their financial interests in Canada and involve themselves in political decision making. I think about, the oil and gas lobby, for instance, which is touted as a Canadian resource but owned by various foreign actors. Would it be helpful for you to at least have some kind of supplementary training to be able to flag for instances where you might see kind of undue activity from these types of entities?
Absolutely. Yes.
And would that be a recommendation that you would make to this committee?
I could certainly make that recommendation to this committee.
What other recommendations do you have to make to this?
Oh, I have lots. I started with 11 of them in 2021, and I've added some to my list. The first one has to be registration by default. Corporations and organizations that speak to all of you up to 30 hours a month without needing to register is absolutely, well, it's not right. It's completely wrong. As I've stated in my opening remarks, I do plan on giving new meaning to significant part of duties and to reduce that threshold. So if I am reappointed, heads up, it's coming down. It will not be 32 hours anymore. That's the first thing. Second, monthly communication reports, oral and arranged in advance. Why does it matter if it was arranged in advance? It's the content of the conversation that matters. And who arranged it is irrelevant as well. Whether you meet them at the corner of the street or in your office, by chance or because it was planned, that needs to be in the registry. Do you want me to go on? Spectrum of sanctions.
I'm going to give you an opportunity.
I'll stop now.
Hang on.
More.
I'm going to give you, Mr. Green, an opportunity to pick this up a little bit later, but that concludes our first round. We're going to start 5 minutes with Mr. Cooper. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madame Maynard, your investigation into ArriveScan remains ongoing, correct? Yes. Okay, thank you for that. We recently saw reports, and I'm not going to ask you to weigh in on it, but we saw reports where the Border Services Agency of Canada said that over 1,800 emails that a parliamentary committee had been ordered to be produced had been destroyed. Now, miraculously, those emails have been found. But hypothetically, if you were to find in the ArriveScam investigation or any other investigation that a government official destroyed documents or emails, government documents or emails, what remedies do you presently have at your disposal?
If I believe that there's an intent to destroy these documents with respect to not providing the information, my only action plan is to send it to the Attorney General for their review of a possible criminal act.
So you would have to refer it to the present Attorney General who sits in Justin Trudeau's cabinet, correct?
To the Justice Minister, yes.
That's okay. Thank you for that. Now, does that cause you any concern, given that in many of these investigations there is exposure on the part of government? I'm not trying to in any way impugn the integrity of the Justice Minister, but there is a perception, certainly, that there isn't the same level of independence that there would be if, for example, you could refer the matter directly to the authorities, such as the RCMP. Is that something that you would like to see happen?
Actually, that was one of the recommendations I made in my submission to the legislative review in 2019, where I suggested that it should be changed to be exactly like the Lobbying Act, where I can refer directly to a police force, RCMP, provincial municipal, the entity that's responsible for to investigate.
Elaborate a little bit about why you would like to be able to report directly to the authorities that would have jurisdiction to investigate whatever the matter may be, as opposed to sending it to the Attorney General.
But the process would be more transparent and it would be more direct. So the police would have direct access to these evidence.
And would you say that at present the Access to Information Act is antiquated and in need of being updated?
I totally agree with your statement.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And you've made a recommendation as far back as 2019 to be able to provide you with the ability to go to the authorities rather than the Attorney General as one change in the mechanisms available to you provided for under the Act. Now, the government has indicated that they're not going to be making any further amendments to the Act. The best that they've offered is a review in 2025. Are you disappointed with the government's response in that regard?
I was disappointed, and I'm still, believe that we need a review of the legislation, which was not done in 2019, and I'm hoping when they say they will review the Act in 2025 that they will actually do it. But to start a review is a different thing than actually doing a review.
And it's been a long time coming.
1983 is the Act, 40 years old. And it has had some changes in 2019 with Bill C-58, but it was not sufficient.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fine. Okay, good. We're going to go to Mr. Baines now. Well, there's a little bit of time. Ms. Belanger, the review for the Lobbying Act was originally done in 2012. Just correct me if I'm wrong. It was supposed to be done in 2017, was not done, and here we are in 2024. It still hasn't been done, correct?
Should have been done in 2017, should have been redone again in 2022, and here we are.
Okay.
We've missed two during my mandate.
Thank you. Mr. Baines for 5, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our commissioners for joining us today. I wanted to just quickly ask about, I know that there's some discussion around forecheck strategies. From a CBC article dated March 22nd, it quoted some lobbyists listed as working for forecheck strategies on the federal lobbying database are listed as employees on the website of Jenny Byrne and Associates, but not on the website of forecheck strategies, end quote. This continues now as lobbyists for Jenny Byrne and Associates are filing communication reports as employees of forecheck strategies, a firm where they do not work. In your last appearance, you said that it was the responsibility of the lobbyist to register. Does a lobbyist have to confirm that they work for the company for which they are registering? That's to the lobbyist commissioner.
There are two types of lobbyists. There are lobbyists that work for consulting firms and represent clients. So when they register on behalf of a client, they will indicate who their client is. And then there's some in-house lobbyists who have an employer. They're not on a government relations firm. They are they work for their organization or their corporation, and part of their duties is to communicate with federal officials. So in the case of organizations and corporations, the responsibility is on the senior official, while if you work for government relations, the responsibility is on the actual consultant.
So each individual is responsible for their action?
Each individual consultant lobbyist is responsible for their actions, yes, if they're a consultant lobbyist.
Is this a concern for you, that someone can register as a lobbyist for a company where there are not an employee? Or
The Lobbying Act allows that. The Lobbying Act allows consultants to represent companies, organizations. So that's permissible because that is the work that they do. that is a profession, and it is recognized by the Lobbying Act as a legitimate activity to lobby, as long as it's transparent and ethical. And so consultant lobbyists will register on behalf of their client, which will usually be an organization or corporation. So I don't have concerns if there's an actual registration, and then once they're registered, they're subject to the code of conduct. I will not discuss forecheck. That is also a file that I am reviewing, but I'm just giving you the explanation of how the Act works.
Okay, yeah, and I'm trying to understand. So if, like, does it raise suspicions for you? I said you're not concerned as long as people are doing it in an ethical manner. But when people are so fluid in their registrations, is this something that you would recommend to clean up in some capacity?
We keep an eye on our registration for sure. So we look at the, every registration is approved by my advisors. So we look at the information that they provide, and then we go and we actually approve a registration. It's an offense to not be accurate, so they better be accurate in their registration. And if they're not accurate and I find out about it, I'll investigate them. And so,
right.
And then there are ethical rules in place, and if there are allegations, you know, there's over 9,000 registered lobbyists. There are a lot of them, and there's a lot of action happening, and there's 34,000 oral and arranged communications last year. So there's a lot of lobbying occurring. So we're keeping an eye on as much as we can.
Okay, but like what I'm trying to get to is so it's not the organization that they're representing, but it's what lobbying firm they're registering that they work for is the concern. So whether they're consultants or whatever, it's the actual work. That's my question, if you're understanding.
The individuals are entitled to go work where they want to go work. I can't regulate that. Once they work somewhere and they choose to become lobbyists and represent a client, then they need to be transparent about it. And if they're transparent about it and it's in our registry, if they're not transparent about it and doing it, that's an offense. If they are transparent about it and the information is accurate, then they're subject to a code of conduct. And they need to ensure that they comply by the code of conduct.
So it's simply if there's suspicion that they're not being transparent, a complaint can come in and you would investigate and continue in that manner, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Baines. That's 5 minutes. Prochaine, Monsieur Villemur, pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Mr. Villemur, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Ménard, Ms. Bélanger. Thank you again. The Privacy Commissioner talks often about privacy being a fundamental right. Do you believe that access to information should also be considered a fundamental right? The right to information has been recognized as a quasi-constitutional right by the Supreme Court. Should the legislation be modified to codify this, it will be up to parliamentarians to decide in the next legislative review. It is a right that belongs to Canadians, so perhaps it should be part of the Access to Information Act. And so you would be supportive of such a measure? Yes. What do you think of the action plan that was published by Treasury Board to modernize the access process? It's an action plan. I've said it a few times. I like to see results, as you know, whether it be from my office or with the system as a whole. An action plan is an action plan, but seeing results is something else. So we're waiting to see the results. The system needs some love, and it's currently difficult to see whether things have improved. So it's a plan without action. It's a plan with actions, but there's no deadline, there's no results. So it's a plan. It's a plan, yeah. The fact that there's hesitancy with the actions of the plan could that undermine the trust that Canadians have regarding this system? I think that most don't see the difference, but they see that they're not receiving answers on time, they're not receiving the information that they want in the time prescribed by the legislation, and institutions are not receiving assistance from their departments or from the government overall in order to respect the increase of requests. Over 200,000 access to information requests were made to the government. I've received over 300 complaints per month. That's 4,000 or 5,000 complaints per year, and things aren't getting better. We need resources, we need investment, we need innovation, we need better information management. These are all things that the government has said it wanted to do, but are we seeing results? Not yet. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Villemur. Mr. Green.
Go ahead.
Ms. Maynard, what are the reasons motivating you to accept a second term as the Information Commissioner of Canada?
I have to say that the last 7 years have gone so fast, and we have done so much. I had presented you with a list of things that have accomplished. I have worked on the backlog. I have worked with institutions. I have issued more orders. I have presented honestly to you what things are happening, how things can be changed, and there's a momentum. And I feel that we can definitely build on what we have accomplished so far. And I do believe that we need to continue to work on the system. There are solutions. My systemic investigations are examples of, recommendation of solutions that the government can implement. I'm waiting still in some cases, for example, for RRCC, for a portal that will provide the information outside of the system. But I do believe there's hope that the system will get better. And I would love to be part of the legislative review in 2025 because of now the experience that I have. When I was here in 2018, when Bill C-58 was presented and tabled, I didn't have the experience that I have now to provide recommendations based on investigations that I have done now for 7 years.
So you have some unfinished business.
Totally.
I appreciate that. Ms. Bélanger, I'm going to ask you the same question. What are the reasons motivating you to serve a second term as Commissioner of Lobbying for Canada?
I also have unfinished business. I have found this work completely, I'm passionate about this. I've been with Agents of Parliament since 2007, and I want to continue. I absolutely love the people I work with. I believe in this mandate. We have done a lot. 7 years, I agree with you, Caroline, have flown by, but there's still more to be done, and I believe I can get it done with my team, obviously.
I believe that to be the case for both of you as well. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. We're going to go to Mr. Caputo, and just before I do, we're going to then go to Mr. Fisher. I'm going to reset. We'll have, we can have 6-minute rounds if we want to conclude, and then I would say we call it a day after that. There's an appropriate motion that needs to be addressed by the committee in order to confirm to Parliament that we're in agreement with the proposal that our two commissioners be appointed. So we're gonna go down that path. Okay. So Mr. Caputo for 5, followed by Mr. Fisher. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank both of our witnesses for being here and for communicating in the professional and forthright way that you have. I'm going to go to first the lobbying commissioner. As I understand it, and this is my first time asking you questions, but my understanding is you draw a distinction between a review and an investigation. Is that correct?
The review is part of an investigative process because if I start looking for information, it's an investigation. But do I need to pursue it to ensure compliance and start possibly issuing production orders and subpoenas, et cetera, which most of the time I don't have to do because people provide me with the information. But there is a lot of information out there that we obtain and that we start looking at, and very, very quickly we know that we're not going to pursue because there's nothing there. So it's really a process, and it's part and parcel of an investigation. Everything I do it under the section that your colleague has quoted.
The reason I ask that is because, and I may have misheard you, so please correct me if I'm wrong, is that one of the issues that's been raised today is with respect to Mark Carney, and I believe you said that you are looking into it. Yes. I took that to mean you're reviewing it. Is that accurate?
That means that I'm looking into it, and whether I'm in investigating stage of it, I will not confirm that.
Of course. So, and that's why I asked whether there was a difference between looking at something versus an investigation, because I think you gave, 119 or 16, I think that was the number of investigations you had mentioned earlier?
I've opened close to 170 files since I've been in office.
I'm sorry.
I would say close to 25 to 30 led to full-blown investigations.
So would this 170 that you have looked into, would Mark Carney's case fit into that 170 but not into that 20 or 25 that resulted in full-blown investigations?
I will only confirm that everything that I look into fits into that 170. When I start actually investigating, I don't confirm because I do not want to jeopardize possible criminal investigations.
And I understand that. I'm just trying to see where we're at, because when we say I'm looking into something and then it's being done under the authority of legislation, yes. I think you can see. Now, what is the threshold for your looking into something, if you will?
Well, I'll start by saying that I do look into everything. The moment that there are communications with any of you, public office holders, public servants, senators, that are not in our registry, I look into it. Very often that leads to nothing because it'll be a volunteer organization, or there's been one communication that clearly does not meet a 30-hour threshold. So, but I do look into everything. And then what I'll do is I'll communicate with public office holders to determine whether or not the amount of communication, how many communication occurred over a span of time. And once I get that information, if I have doubts now that we're into lobbying that was not registered, I trigger what we call the investigation, and then it proceeds from there.
So when it comes to Mr. Carney, we have several what I would call discrete areas of interest that I'm interested in. One of them is the heat pump issue. I think my colleague, Mr. Barrett, called it the heat pump hustle, and I'm not going to attempt to steal his quote on that. We also have his involvement with Stripe. We have him issuing a fundraising email on behalf of the Liberal Party of Canada. We have his involvement with Brookfield, and Brookfield then looking for $10 billion of new investments. And then we have $2 billion contract to a company that whose CEO is close to Mr. Carney. Now, are you able to say whether any one of those discrete issues, if you will, would rise to the threshold that I just mentioned of you having to look into something?
I will not comment on a file.
Okay. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
You have 20 seconds.
All right. I wish you both all the best. Thank you.
That took 3. Okay, we're going to go to Mr. Fisher for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for being here today. Ms. Maynard, according to your most recent annual report, only 16% of complaints were well-founded. How much of your office's capacity is impacted by these unfounded or unwarranted or trivial or malicious complaints?
The percentage you refer to is investigations that leads to a result of well-founded, and then an order is usually issued. And that really is a small amount because we are trying our best to resolve complaints informally. The role of my office is to make sure that requesters are getting the information as quickly as possible that they are entitled to, or that a response is provided to them. So what we do is we do investigation. We investigate until that response is provided, and then we cease the investigation if that response is given during the investigation. So there's a lot of time and there's a lot of effort done in those cases, which is like almost 80% of our investigations that leads to a result, a positive result, but not into a report itself.
How has the proportion of those unfounded claims changed from, say, 7 years ago, or has it changed proportionally in your 7 years?
It seems to be very similar every year in terms of what we find to be founded and not well-founded. Unfortunately, we seem to be having some institutions that are still using, Section 21, for example, advice and recommendations in cases where on information that is not in advice and recommendations, and we will let them know right away during an investigation, and sometimes we convince them during the investigation and the information is released. But there's a lot of work done in the background to get that information released. And but now, because I have the authority to issue orders, what we do is we don't spend too much time negotiating. We try to get the information voluntarily, and if not, we issue an order. And in the last 7 years, I've issued over 700 orders.
So how do you foresee the number of these complaints? So going back to your annual report, 16% for this year, is it always been around 16%?
Of the well-founded?
Well-founded.
I think it was more before, because we're now getting to that because we're going to be issuing an order, and we know that the order is the last drop of the, it's really when we know we can't agree with the institution, and at that point, I don't want to waste any more time negotiating or talking or getting to explain to the institution why we don't agree with them. So an order is issued, and those 16% is representative of the orders that I have issued.
Is there any thought that some of these unfounded complaints are malicious in nature or a political tactic?
There's a new disposition in the act that an institution is allowed to refuse to respond to an access request if it's vexatious, made in bad faith, but they have to ask my permission. And in the last 6 years, I think I've received 49 cases like this, but we only agreed to 11 of those. So it's not that often that a request is vexatious or made in bad faith.
Do you expect the number to go up in the coming years, or do you expect it, based on what you said, it sounds like you think it'll stay fairly static, but...
The number of complaints goes up with the number of access requests being made. It's proportionate. Like, the more access requests I've made, and Canadians know their rights, so they're asking more information, the more we get complaints, because the institutions are overwhelmed with the number of requests, and they don't have the resources to respond to those access requests. That keeps going up every year. When I ask for finance for me, I can respond to access, to the complaints that I receive as much as I can. But institutions are also in need of resources, better process, and better technology to respond to that increase in requests as well.
Okay. Last year, the Conservatives voted against your funding for your office last year. Do you worry that by asking for funding directly from Parliament instead of from government, that there could be less accountability for funding for your office?
I don't think there was anybody. I've asked for funding for the last 10 years, not me only, the former commissioners. It's been approved 3 times in 10 years. But we don't usually know if it's going to be accepted or not until it's in the budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Wow, that was fast. Thank you.
Okay. So that concludes our first hour. We have got 6-minute interventions, and then we will conclude on that. I understand that Mr. Cooper and Mr. Barrett will be splitting their time, and we're going to start with Mr. Cooper for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and perhaps as a starting point to correct Mr. Fisher, Conservatives voted non-confidence in this rotten and corrupt government.
That's right.
We didn't vote against additional funding for the Commissioner. But Ms. Maynard, is it correct that your office sought $6 million in interim funding from this government in 2023?
In 2023, we requested $3 million.
And $6 million in 22?
Since 2018, every year we asked for $3 million in temporary funding, and in 2020, it was permanent funding, which was given to us, and since then, we haven't received any funding additional to that.
So you've been turned down by the government?
I haven't received any responses.
Okay, so I would submit that that is the equivalent of being turned down if you haven't received any response. Now, on a different note, the Public Accounts Committee has been seized with the Liberals' Green Slush Fund scandal. One of the issues that we have been probing, it was the appointment of conflict-ridden chair Annette Verschaeren. There is evidence that NAFD Baines rigged the process to appoint a Liberal insider, Ms. Verschaeren, as chair of SDTC, better known as the Green Slush Fund. Now, the committee ordered that the PCO turn over all emails and all documents between the PCO and the Minister of Industry's office, then Minister Baines' office, the PMO, as well as the Department of Industry. And incredibly, not a single email could be found. We're talking about the appointment of the chair of someone who was responsible for overseeing $1 billion taxpayer dollars. Now, one of the issues that was identified by PCO in explaining why they couldn't find any emails was that many of the records were transitory in nature and therefore had been destroyed. Do you have any thoughts on the existing policy around transitory records and whether that needs to be reexamined, the policy?
The policy on records is administered by the by Treasury Board, and same thing for retention of emails and documents. I've always said, and my former commissioners as well, that there is a need for a legislative duty to document whether, decisions, as you mentioned, and I cannot comment on this particular situation as we may have a complaint and we may have to investigate, but there is definitely a need, especially nowadays in the technology that we're facing, a need to document decisions that have an impact on our decisions that are being made in the government. Right now, there is no such thing as a legislative duty to document, and it's something that we had recommended as well in our submissions to legislative review.
Go ahead, Mr. Barrett. 2.5.
Commissioner Maynard, so yesterday on X, Matt Gurney, who's a journalist at theline.ca, wrote, "A U.S. federal agency gave me a detailed response to a question I sent today. It included more info than I asked for and a statement I could attribute to an official. Response time was 2.5 hours. Sigh." Why is it possible for a Canadian journalist to extract a response like that from the U.S. government, and no journalist can extract anything like that from the Canadian government?
I cannot comment on that particular situation. I can tell you that some journalists are getting information quickly as well with this government, but there's also a lot of frustration when institutions are not responding within a quick response. And then there's a difference between a media request and an access to information request. I'm responsible for the access.
There are 8 tips in this country older than my children. They're 11, 10, 8, 6, and 4 years old, and there's 8 tips older than each of them. Why?
Again, I think this system is overwhelmed. The act is antiquated. We're dealing with institutions that are reviewing papers by hand. removing duplicates by hand. There's a lot to be done. Even within my institution, I had a backlog of files that were the age of your kids. And fortunately, because we became more efficient, we're reduced that age, but it's still not sufficient. We still need more resources to respond to access requests in a timely manner, because as you mentioned, like, the information has to be relevant. When you ask for information, you want it now. You don't want it in 10 years, unless you are doing a history book, you know. But it is unfortunate that this is a situation in Canada.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. I am now going to go to Ms. Shanahan. Go ahead for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. So I want to return to this question of lobbyist registration, Madame Bélanger, because, and especially with this case in particular of Jenny Byrne plus associates, because it's clear that Jenny Byrne was a registered lobbyist with her firm prior to Pierre Poilievre becoming the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. But then within days of that happening, this new company, ForeCheck Strategies, was registered, and employees from the Jenny Byrne Plus company were working for ForeCheck, but it wasn't per the website of ForeCheck and the website of Jenny Byrne. There was still some confusion or omissions of registration of employees, and as a result of some excellent reporting work from the media, questions were asked, and then Jenny Byrne's photo was taken down. So changes were made to the two websites in question and the registration following those questions. Now, you know, I think that's the definition of setting up a shell company myself, but, you know, we're not there to talk to that. But I think we understand that the real issue is the influence that somebody can have working as a lobbyist, whether they're registered or not, where they're working with private companies, and then they have influence on politicians that would be formulating policy and so on. So reports indicate that Ms. Byrne does indeed attend regular caucus meetings, meetings which are typically reserved for Conservative MPs, senators. Apparently, I think the Conservatives still have their senators with them, and Conservative staff, and that Ms. Byrne apparently is actively participating in morning strategy calls within the opposition leader's office. So I think in situations like this, I think we have seen in other cases individuals actually consulting with the officer of Parliament in question for advice. So has Ms. Byrne ever consulted your office for advice on this matter, on her change in roles?
Whether Ms. Byrne consulted my office or not, I would not confirm. The many people call our office for advice, and it's confidential advice. If lobbyists are lobbying and are not registered, I look into it. If they're not lobbying, then they don't need to be registered, and the matter ends there. I review everything, and as I have stated before, this is a matter that I continue to review, and I will not comment any further on it.
Thank you, but it is very illuminating, because it does seem that, you know, people do change roles, and it can happen not always in a very transparent fashion. So is this something that your office would advise on if asked?
Well, obviously, if any of you leave your office, you're subject to some rules. Once you leave office, you're subject to the prohibition on lobbying. So, of course, I would advise you on. So when people change jobs, when people actually participate in your political activities, then they ask me if they can lobby you. So we do get a lot of questions. about their role and when they communicate and how the code of conduct applies.
Well, thank you for that. Could you elaborate then on that kind of advice, when it's a lobbyist that is now becoming a political staffer, for example?
So someone who is a lobbyist who leaves their function as lobbyist and become a political staffer, there are absolutely, it's a constitutional right to participate in partisan political activities, so individuals can do that. Should they choose to come back to being a lobbyist afterwards, then there will be rules in place, and then I will tell them at that time they need to call me back, because there will likely be some cooling off periods so that they can't lobby certain individuals, because there clearly would be a sense of obligation. So it's a very much case-by-case basis.
I thank you for that. Do you think that there are gaps actually in the current legislation around lobbying, that there are indeed loopholes that people are taking advantage of?
Oh, there are a few.
Okay.
I would love to come back and chat with you anytime about that. So for sure, there's, again, the threshold, spectrum of sanctions. We can talk about, directing minds and volunteers and the post-employment restriction. If any of you leave, you can't lobby as a consultant. You can go lobby for a corporation up to 20% of your work, but you can't go lobby for an organization. There are some bizarre rules in the Lobbying Act that need to be fixed, absolutely.
Okay, and how much time do I have, Chair?
You got 14 seconds.
Well, I think we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Good, thank you. And hence the need to relook, right,
Lobbying Act and
Right.
make changes, not just review.
Right.
Make changes.
12 years. Monsieur Villemure, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you. Ms. Bélanger, thank you for the rigor that you bring to different topics. You shared with colleagues about what they can do, but I'm not going to talk about Jenny Burns or Mark Carney. You talked about independence and how important it is. What would you have to say? Independence is important financially, and we need to not be influenced. We need to have integrity. We can't be influenced by what's happening. We have to be ready to listen, but maintain our integrity and make decisions depending on the facts and the legislation. There are people who write to us about different topics, and someone said to me that your mandate should not be renewed. And they said that you didn't investigate on 9 cases that were referred to the RCMP. I would like to hear what you have to say about that. You will decide whether or not my mandate is renewed, you and the Senate. So people's opinions, well, I know that all of the files that end up in front of me will be examined closely. I will examine them closely. I'm not sure what those 9 investigations are. If there was an offense, I send the matter to the RCMP, and I've sent them 16. I take this very seriously. I would say that the files that I sent are not all equal. Sometimes it's one person who missed a report, but that's an offense and I have to send it on. But I would like to have some sort of discretion to determine when to make a public report instead of sending it to the RCMP, because there are some offenses that are more significant than others, but they are all sent to the RCMP. Currently, it's yes or no, and you would need some nuance. We Charity, Facebook, SNC Lavalin, because these are matters that have been raised. Do you remember that? Do you remember why you apparently did not investigate on those files? I don't want to speak to those files To say that I did not investigate is completely false information. It's unfounded. I'm not sure where that person got that information. I look at everything. And I confirmed with Facebook, We Charity, SNC Lavalin, I did what I always do, and I examined all the files. Your work is impartial, neutral, objective, impartial. I work with integrity. I respect people. I respect democracy. I'm transparent, of course, as much as I can. And when we talk about Canadians' trust and, well, it's important that lobbying be done transparently and ethically, and if rules aren't being met, I need to do enforcement. After years of the institution being in place, a lot of people have a negative view of lobbying, that it's an arrangement between people who know each other. Do you have any plans to educate Canadians? When I say that we were able to speak with more than 9 million people over the last 7 years, my first message to them is to say that lobbying is not the same as in the United States. This is a legitimate activity as long as it's transparent and ethical. My issue is that we have a lot of work to do on transparency. That's where the legislation needs to be changed. I hear you very clearly, and we will factor this recommendation into account. Last year, we talked about the Lobbyist Code of Conduct. Are you satisfied with the update? What has it changed in your day-to-day? I am very satisfied. Lobbyists that I have met, when I meet them for presentations, they have appreciated the fact that rules are clear. That said, I'm receiving a lot more calls to my office. This has increased the workload, and this is not a complaint. This is good. And they want to know whether or not their behaviors are ethical or not. And that's great, because before we weren't receiving any calls. We didn't know what was happening. Now I know. I know about hospitality, receptions, gifts. It's great. I'm aware. I'm informed. And that helps us do our work and helps us give advice so that they stay ethical. It's interesting. I receive comments from different people, but to ensure that people can trust the institution, is there something that can be done? Yes. That's one of the goals that I talk to my team about. We're not a lot of people. And so how can I reach those Canadians who are interested in this? Because not all are interested. A lot of them are interested on Twitter, I can tell you that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Monsieur Villemur and Ms. Bélanger.
Yep.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Maynard, you stated many times, including in your special report to Parliament on May 2024, that the best access request remains the one that did not need to be made in the first place. Can you elaborate on this idea?
Well, I believe in transparency by default. And I do believe that our institutions should use that as their first mean to provide information to Canadians. We should not have to ask information through an access request. We should not have to wait 30 days. We should be able to click on a Google and get the information from the internet and from pages that are already public. Institutions that are receiving requests multiple times on subject should know that that's something that people wants to know about, and they should publish that information instead of waiting for an access request. That's what it means.
You may recall in your time that in July of 2018 until October 2021, the Liberal government actually had a Minister of Digital Government who seemingly was responsible for providing information technologies, kind of a whole of government approach, as well as digital strategies and programs of the Treasury Board Secretariat. in your time, did you witness any real efforts to see this ministry, or at least this mandate under Minister Murray at the time, Bryson before then? Was there any movement towards this idea of open by default? Because certainly it's something that the Liberal government campaigned on, but it seems like sometime in 2021 just pulled the plug on.
Fortunately, I've not been kept in the loop of what the minister has been doing with respect to digitalization. We know that there's work being done, but unfortunately, the number of access requests has not gone down, so it doesn't seem to be having had an impact on the information provided.
They abolished it in October of 2021, and I was just wondering if in your time you had seen any material improvement and then decline, or was this an exercise in futility? I'll go back to the funding model, because on March 7th, 2023, during your appearance before our committee, you made the following statement. It was a strong one. You said, and I quote, "I strongly believe the model that gives the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister the power to limit the required funding of agents of Parliament is contrary to our oversight role. As agents of Parliament, we report directly to Parliament rather than to a cabinet or a particular minister. Frankly, the manner in which we are funded should reflect this independence." Do you still have the same position on the issue?
100%.
It was also reported, if I recall correctly, that your department was positioned in a structural deficit resulting from unfunded salary increases that were further to the collective agreement negotiated by the Treasury Board. Is that still the case?
Yes. So in June, we asked for. We were told that the only way to resolve this situation is to ask for an off-cycle budget ask, which we submitted in June, and to this day, I haven't heard whether that budget request has been submitted to the Finance Minister by the Minister of Justice.
And this really is a practical example of the flaw in the funding model to begin with. That in fact, when left to political actors, partisan actors, that you're effectively left with a structural deficit. Is that correct? Is it safe to say that causation and correlation are one and the same here?
I'm kept out of the loop, and that's the reason I believe that we have to have a different mechanism so that we can have that discussion with parliamentary people that we are reporting to, and that we can ask and provide evidence for these requests that we need additional funding.
In your annual report, you state that you'd like to see an overhaul of the access to information system and that legislative changes are needed to meet the needs of the 21st century. You also note in the amendments to the access of information are unlikely to be proposed until 2025. In what main respects should the Access to Information Act be modernized?
There's, like in NC, there's a lot to be changed, but definitely, as I've testified before, we need an act that will make cabinet ministers and the Prime Minister's office subjected to the Act of Access to Information. We need cabinet confidence to be subjected to the Act. We need an independent mechanism of financing. The list is very long. We need an overall review of exemptions and exclusions. We need a public interest override, which is one act that we don't have that in Canada compared to other jurisdictions. Like I said earlier, I will use these 7 years of experience that I've had to submit better and longer and more supported submissions in 2025 when the act is reviewed, if I have the chance to be renewed in my position.
Well, it's looking, as I say, not to preempt anybody, but it's looking like that's going to be the case. I just want to thank both of you for being here today. Certainly your work is cut out for you in this respect, and I do hope, at least from our NDP position, that we find these independent processes for funding that are non-politicized and not relying on cabinet, because we also agree that you are agents of Parliament and not of any one minister. So thanks again for being here. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. I do have a question for Madame Belanger. Earlier in your testimony, you said that there were 9,000 registered lobbyists right now. You said, if I recall, there are a lot of lobbyists. In the 7 years that you've been here since the start, what was the number 7 years ago of registered lobbyists that existed?
So the average is from active registered was about 5,700. Now the average is 7,400, so about 2,000. Our peak has been 9,000 any one time because lobbyists go in, go out, go in. So we've had peaks of 9,000. So they've raised about 2,000.
So would it be safe to say that it's like 40% increase in the amount of lobbyists?
And it's
roughly?
about the same for active registrations.
Right.
The number of registrations.
Okay.
Monthly communication reports, so these oral and arranged in advance communications in 2017, there were 23,000.
Right.
Now we're at 34.
Okay.
So everything's increased.
Okay. So, look, on behalf of the committee, as chair of a committee that provides oversight on access to information and lobbying, I want to thank you both for the work that you've done. You've been in front of this committee. I've been chairing it now for over 2 years. You've been in front of this committee several times, and within that time, you've been forthright in the information that you provided, despite the sense of frustration that I get when you appear. But notwithstanding that, you plow through and you provide not just this committee, Parliament, but all Canadians valuable information in the work that you do. And so I, as chair of this committee, have the utmost confidence in your reappointment and your ability to continue to do your work for the next 7 years. But again, that's one voice, and I will turn to Mr. Fisher now to move the appropriate motion to report this to the House, that the committee has confidence in your appointment. We will open it up for debate. I suspect that there will be none, but that's up to the committee members. And then I will stand and report positively how this committee feels about your appointment. Mr. Fisher, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again to both our witnesses. I move that the committee has considered the proposed appointment of Caroline Maynard as Information Commissioner of Canada and reports its support for Ms. Maynard's appointment to the House.
Motion has been moved. Any discussion? I see thumbs up on Zoom. I don't see any discussion, so I'm going to treat that as a unanimous. Okay, thank you. Yes, and go ahead, the second one, please.
I also move that the committee has considered the proposed appointment of Nancy Bélanger as Commissioner of Lobbying of Canada and reports its support for Ms. Bélanger's appointment to the House.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fisher. The motion has been moved. I actually saw 2 thumbs up from Mr. Green there. Any other discussion on that? No, so I'm going to treat that as unanimous consent as well. Thank you for moving that, Mr. Fisher. Again, thank you for being in front of the committee today and providing us with the information that you did. And we continue to wish you the best of luck. And I do want to thank your staff as well. I know both of you have acknowledged and recognized the work that your staff do. It's tough work, but we appreciate it. Thank you so much. So this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.